Hey everyone, welcome back to another round of second stimulus check updates. We're talking all about the Federal Reserve today and what that means for the second round, and a lot of states are starting to spike, so that may have an effect too. Check it out. Hey everyone, welcome back to another stimulus update. I'm Logan.
Hi, I'm Dean.
And we have some pretty cool stuff coming up. So we first want to lead off with the Federal Reserve is meeting today, Wednesday. So Adine, what does this even mean? Why does the Federal Reserve need to meet?
So they meet pretty regularly and they go over really figuring out what's going on in the economy, and ultimately the goal is to figure out what monetary policies they implement. And I think we've talked about it a number of times, some of the tools that they have to either speed up the economy, slow it down through interest rates. We talked about how they purchase bonds from the government, mortgage bonds, and so forth. So what they're going to be trying to figure out today and talk about is we recently basically have gotten the news that we officially entered a recession back in February of this year. And that's not a surprise to anybody because as retail and restaurants have shut down, that means we're spending less at those establishments, and a majority of our economy is based on that. And so now, in most normal times when we go into recession, the Federal Reserve tries to expand monetary policy, which means that they make it easier for people to borrow money. They kind of put money into the economy to try to get us to spend. And as it relates to where we're at now, what they're trying to determine is all these different programs that the federal government has implemented, the fiscal side in terms of stimulus, how can they continue to support that, as well as we've seen in the past week, especially with the jobs number last Friday, we've seen interest rates actually spike up. And that's caused mortgage rates to spike up and lending rates across the board to spike up. And so now they're going to have to tell us, well, are we okay with that? Or do we as the Federal Reserve need to step in and figure out how to get those rates to go back down to continue to encourage people to take out mortgages, to continue to take out debt, in order, with the idea being that we're going to take out debt to spend it, whether it's at brick and mortar stores or online, buying cars, houses, and so forth. So it's really, this meeting is important because it tells us where the top economists in the country think we are economically.
Because I remember last week, Larry Kudlow came out, who's a senior White House advisor, and said, we want to get America back to taking risks again. So when he says stuff like that, is that kind of what we're talking about here as far as borrowing money?
It's a part of it. So when he says we want people to take risks, taking risk means investing, means buying things like houses, means starting businesses. To do all of those things, you essentially need money. And what they're also trying to do is, the biggest employers in the country are publicly traded companies, right? And what they do when the Federal Reserve comes in and buys bonds and brings interest rates down, it makes saving not worthwhile, right? You have money sitting in the bank in a savings account earning 0.5%. And so you start thinking, well, it can sit there and earn nothing while inflation out here is going up at 2, 3, 4%. Why don't I take my money and invest it in stocks? Why don't I take it, invest it in a business? Why don't I take that, buy a house, and so forth? So that's when he talks about taking risk, he's really trying to encourage people to take money out of savings, if you have some money in savings, and put it to work.
I got you. So how does this meeting that's going to happen today, how does this affect another round of stimulus? I know we've already been told, yes, we're definitely going to get it. It seems like we're going to be really pushing more for payroll tax cuts and things like that. So how does the Federal Reserve meeting affect a second round?
So the Federal Reserve has no bearing on what happens in terms of direct stimulus and which one of the different proposals gets accepted or gets passed. However, what we're going to hear from them is they're going to say, look, don't worry about more debt. The concern always, especially with Republicans, is Well, we have budget deficits at the federal level. We've had budget deficits for decades with occasional spurts of budget surpluses. It's really irrelevant. And what they're saying is, look, if you do another round of stimulus, we're going to support it because the federal government's going to issue bonds, they're going to issue debt, and we're going to buy it. And we're going to make it very cheap for the federal government to issue more stimulus. So we're here, we're going to do whatever we need to do to support another round of stimulus. Now, Congress, do your job and actually pass another round.
So effectively, they're the bank. They're the ones saying, don't worry about it. You send out the money. We'll hook you up. We got you covered.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. So with all this going on right now, I mean, we have all these states that are reopening. Republicans effectively at this point have come out and said we're not going to vote on anything until like mid to late July. So they keep, we went from right after Memorial Day to late June, and now we're pushing past, like the midway point of July as far as when something's going to come out. They've always been in this wait and see mode, and now we have states reopening, but we're starting to see cases start to spike back up. So I guess with all of that, like, where does that put us stimulus-wise? Does that help the cause? Does it hurt the cause? Or is it just kind of make the Republicans say, well, this is exactly why we wanted to wait and see?
The crazy thing is, we've talked about this, you can paint a picture depending on which way you want to view it. You have 19 states that have an increasing number of cases. On the flip side, you have 24 states that are reporting a decline in cases, and 7 that are about steady. So when you look at those numbers, the Republicans are going to say, look, we got more states that are declining. Democrats are going to say we got 19 that are spiking. And so it's not going to go anywhere. It's just another statistic that's going to get buried somewhere. However, if we see that flip to one side over the other in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think that's going to give us a very good indication of what that next round might look like. And then I think the biggest piece of the stimulus that we're all trying to get past and try and get some clarity on is this $600 a week unemployment. Now, there's been one proposal out of the many that would tie extending unemployment benefits to your state and your state's unemployment rate. And obviously, the unemployment rate is going to get tied indirectly to the number of cases that you have in that state and the reopening. So what I think can happen here is the states, if a proposal like this passes, the states are seeing this increase in cases are going to get an extension of the unemployment benefits, whereas the states that are decreasing and their unemployment rate decreases, they're going to have basically a quicker phase out of additional unemployment benefits.
Now, keep in mind, everyone, that this is just a proposal. This is not, set in stone by any means. But this is one of those circumstances where the first, like with the CARES Act, with the $600 that came out, it was a flat $600. So, Adina and I live in Charlotte, so $600, it doesn't go as far as somebody out in, the middle of nowhere, but it also goes way farther than somebody in New York City where $600 is like a cup of coffee and one night of rent. So it all varies, but this one would be more related to state-by-state basis of unemployment, which I think it's a better route to go. But I'm sure from a logistical standpoint, it's way easier just to send out $600 a week to everybody compared to going state by state. But I guess we'll have to, like the Republicans say, wait and see what's going on. But that seems to me like a more appropriate reaction to all of this, because then you don't give it to the states that don't need it, which is what the Republicans are very against, but you also give it to those that do need it, which is exactly what the Democrats want.
Exactly, and so I think that's sort of the roadblock here is administering this sort of program. We had issues with the original, the $600 a week. I know people who had to wait 4, 6, 8 weeks to get it, and then yes, that you get back pay, but in that 4, 6, 8 weeks, you had a lot of bills to pay as well. So again, the longer they drag this out, it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't even help the government, because the government's the one that's got to implement it.
And with this first round of stimulus, that the $1,200 that came out, They came out originally, it said 10 million people don't have it. Well, now it's looking more like 30 to 35 million. But for those that got the prepaid debit card, you would throw this card away, because we had a whole video where Dean kept showing this white envelope to show what the actual like message it would come in. They were charging people to replace these cards. So, Dean, I guess now they're backtracking on that.
Right. So what happened is the IRS contracted with a third party called MetaBank. And MetaBank was responsible for sending out these debit cards with your stimulus check on them. But there was no indication on the envelope that that's what it was. It looked like it was junk mail, like it was a credit card offer. So a lot of people just threw it away. And so then you had to call MetaBank and say, well, I threw mine away, send me a replacement, and they would charge you $7.50 to send you that replacement. Well, on Monday, the IRS announced that they're going to waive the $7.50 replacement fee, and essentially, if you did throw it away because nobody knew what was going to happen, nobody knew what the envelopes would look like, so the first replacement is free. If you've already called and asked for a replacement and they charged you the $7.50, they're actually going to credit you that $7.50 and top it back off on that debit card.
Beautiful. And then to kind of touch on one last subject, PPP wise. So 60% has to be spent on payroll. What happens if you don't hit 60%?
Yeah, so when the Flexibility Act was passed that allowed you to spend only 60 instead of the original 75, the way it was written was that if you don't spend 60% on payroll, none of your PPP loan gets forgiven. So that spooked out a lot of people, especially in my profession, because we got to deal with it. But they now came out and said, look, the way it was written and the way it was intended to be written is different. We're still going to go back to the original guidance from the SBA and allow you a pro rata forgiveness. So let's say you only spend 50% on payroll, you're going to get a reduction in your forgiveness, and that way it still helps you, but you might not have 100% of your PPP loan forgiven, which is a huge positive.
So it's just not black and white, either hit 60 or get none of it forgiven. They're being a little bit more lenient on that.
Correct.
Beautiful. All right, cool. Everyone, there you go. There's your stimulus update for today. As always, if you want to stay up to date with everything, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.